Hey guys, it's Willing Away and welcome to another episode of Through the Parks. This is a very late one. I know it's going to be posted pretty late. I'm recording this pretty late, but hopefully I can get it out before like midnight. But hi, welcome. Today we'll be covering the national park called Wind Caves, which I never knew existed. It was fun to research. I enjoyed researching it. That was nice. It's a very interesting park. We'll get into that more, but I do know what our Saturday park is going to be already. It is going to be the Grand Tetons, and that one is going to have a lot of research. I've already looked at where I usually get my research from, and oh my god, it's going to be a long one. So that one hopefully will be on time, but just understand if it's a little later, it's due to the fact that it's like so many pages long. But yeah, so like always, I'm going to get started with our overall info for the parks, and then we'll just get into it and continue talking about the history and other stuff about this park. So, Wind Cave National Park is located in western South Dakota, and it is 10 miles north of the town of Hot Springs. It was established on January 3rd, 1903 by President Theodore Roosevelt, and was the 6th national park in the U.S., along with the first ever cave to be designated as a national park in the entire world. The cave is known for its calcite formations, also known as boxwork, and its frostwork. 95% of the world's discovered boxworks are found in the cave, and it is also known to be the densest cave system in the world, meaning that it has the greatest passage volume per cubic mile. So the cave is technically the 7th longest cave in the world, spanning at 154.2 miles, and is the 3rd longest cave in the U.S. Although the national park is like the caves itself, the park also does have above ground stuff, and that would include the largest natural mixed grass prairie in the United States. Now we get into the origin of the name Wind Cave. So the passages in the cave are said to, and this surprised me, I was shocked. I was like, what? They are said that they breathe, in quotes, because air is continually moving into or out of the caves. So I wrote down, basically, the caves experience a type of osmosis. If you don't know what osmosis is, basically, if there's a higher concentration in one area, all that higher concentration will move towards a lower concentration to balance it out. So once it does that, usually this osmosis is with air pressure. So if the air pressure is higher outside, it'll flow inside to stabilize the pressure, and then vice versa. If the pressure in the cave is higher, it'll flow out to, stabilize the pressure, and that's what causes these like breathing type things. It generates the wind with the wind rushing out and the wind rushing in, just that kind of stuff. So a large cave with only a few small openings will tend to breathe more than a small cave with like many openings. And it was stated that if a fast-moving storm was approaching on the day that the Bingham brothers found the cave, that is how they would have felt wind blowing out of the cave, which would create the wind that the cave was named after, due to, yet again, air pressure and all that kind of stuff. Next, we're going to get into the history of the area. This is definitely our longest research, but the most interesting. So the Lakota, Shene, I know how to pronounce that, Shene, I believe, and other Native American tribes who were around the area knew of the cave's existence, along with some early Euro-American settlers. However, there was no evidence that anyone actually entered the cave at the time. So the Lakota are an indigenous people who live in the Black Hills area of South Dakota, and they have spoken of a hole that blew air, and that this place they would consider a sacred site. This was because it was believed that this cave was where they first emerged from the underworld, where they had lived before the demerge creation of the world. So this is their origin point, was the Wind Cave. So the cave was originally called Washun Naya, and played a very important role in the traditions and culture of the Lakota, considering that it is technically seen as the origin point. So the fables of the Lakota tell of the story of Tokahi. He was the first human to emerge from the cave, and this was seen as an emergence from the underworld. His story and presence is very important to the Lakota history and definitely heavily influences their origin story, considering first human to emerge out of this cave. It is a very important story. Consider it like, I was going to say like, consider it like, I guess, Jesus in the Bible. It's a very important part of the story. Like, a lot of people know Jesus, but to them it was Tekoa, because he was the first human to emerge from the cave. So the cave and areas of the Black Hills are very important to the Native people in other ways beyond spirituality. So it was nicknamed as a supermarket, in quotes, because the area around the cave provided like abundant resources for survival and was just a very good place to get resources. And during the winter, the caves are actually very ideal spots for camps. Many of the game around the area would use the caves as shelter, and then eventually these areas became settlements and hunting grounds. So in 1851, this is when we start to get into the dates. In 1851, a treaty was formed at Fort Laramie, which entered the tribe into a legal relationship with the U.S. government, and then another treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868 greatly reduced the borders of the Lakota tribe within the Black Hills. Article 2 of this treaty stated that it allowed for forts to be built on the land. And then in 1874, General A. Custer would begin his survey on the land and mistakenly report that there was, in quotes, a ton of gold on the land. However, all of the geologists on his team that he was with said that there was no gold on the land. There had not been any presence of it. But due to General A. Custer stating that there was gold on the land, many miners would soon begin to invade the land. This is due to what they thought was the presence of gold, and then, yet again, this was against the treaty with the Lakota. However, the government did very little to punish the miners. In 1875, the Lakota title to the land was deemed invalid due to what the government thought was a lack of structural development and what they thought was, in quotes, wasting the land. This is just another way that the U.S. government would eventually push out a lot of Native Americans from the land that they were agreed to, but we'll get more into that. So when the Dawes Act was passed in 1877, the site was then opened to settlers and would eventually seal the dispossession of the Lakota from their ancestral land. So yeah, it's awful. They basically, it's like, we just covered this national park that had the same problem. Badlands, I believe. I believe the Badlands had the same problem, where the Native Americans on the land made a deal with the U.S. through a treaty, and then the treaty got broke, and they got disrespected like that. So, it seems to follow a lot of these national parks where this stuff happens. So the first documented discovery of the cave by white Americans was in 1881, when Tom and Jesse Bingham heard wind rushing from a 10-inch hole. From the story that is told, Tom would eventually look into the hole, and the wind that was exiting the cave would blow the hat off of his head. From 1881 to 1889, very few people went into the wind cave. However, in 1889, the South Dakota Mining Company would hire Jesse D. McDonald to oversee the mining claim on the cave. The South Dakota Mining Company would probably hope to find very valuable minerals in the cave, but it was also possible that they had already had a commercial development of the cave in mind from the start. Eventually, no valuable minerals were ever found, so the McDonalds began to develop the cave for tourism. Jesse initially would hire his son Alvin and his brother Elmer in 1891 to explore and develop this cave, and that would lead Alvin to fall in love with the cave and eventually keep what is called a cave diary. Others would also work and help explore the cave between the years of 1890 and 1903. These would include Katie Stabler, Emma McDonald, Inez McDonald, and Tommy McDonald. In February 1892, the cave was eventually opened for visitors, and the standard fee was $1. But in today's money, that would essentially be the cost of $30. Tourists would explore this cave by candlelight on guided tours. However, these very early tours would become really physically demanding. due to at some points requiring the tourist to crawl through very narrow passages. It was also stated that Herb, I'm guessing that's Herb, and Jan Khan would play a very important role in cave exploration during the 1960s, and it was implied that they helped with the Wind Cave in some way, but it was not stated. That is the end of the history. That is all that we kind of have. Everything after that is kind of known. It's just kind of the end of how the Wind Cave would become and kind of the early explorations into the cave. Now we get into the flora and fauna that is on the land above in the national park. So the wildlife of the park would include raccoons, elk, bison, coyotes, skunks, badgers, ermines, black-footed ferrets, cougars, bobcats, red foxes, minks, whooping cranes, pronghorns, and prairie dogs. The Wind Cave bison herd is one of the 4 free-roaming and genetically pure herds on public lands in North America. The other 3 we have mentioned one before, which is the Yellowstone herd, along with the Henry Mountains herd and the Elk Island herd. The Wind Cave herd is currently labeled as brucellosis-free, which we covered before. Brucellosis is like a type of disease that I believe is passed to bison through some form, but is also known to pass it through dairy cows. And so a lot of people got very, I believe, protected of their herds and wanted some bison gone. And so now they're currently trying to get some of the herds. I believe Yellowstone herd is not brucellosis free. I would have to go and look at that again, but the Wind Cave herd is brucellosis free. So the black-footed ferret and the whooping crane are on the endangered species list. They're, I believe, the only 2 endangered species in the Wind Cave National Park. And yet again, I believe just like the Badlands, I believe is when we mentioned this, the whooping crane population is considered a non-self-sustaining wild population, meaning it can not survive in the wild by itself. Now we get into the climate of the Wind Cave. So throughout the years, the Great Plains have had a considerable rise in temperature. The average temp rise along the plain has been an increase of 2 degrees Fahrenheit, while some areas would increase by 5 degrees Fahrenheit. This trend of increasing rising temperature has caused drought-like conditions in the area, and that is all that is really known so far about that. There's just kind of a little bit of a concern about the rising temperature over there. Now we get into the infrastructure. That just means like the roads, the trails, and the visitor center. So there are several roads that run along the park, and then there's also 30 miles of hiking trails. The park had an estimated 656,397 visitors in 2018, while in 2015, more than 109,000 people would tour the cave. These cave tours were limited to 40 people each, and that was the restriction. So the Wind Cave Visitor Center has 3 different exhibit rooms, some about the geology of the caves, others about the cave's early history, the park wildlife, natural history, and then eventually the CCC's work in the park, which they are back again. We have covered them before. They are a very prominent group in national parks. They helped build a lot of the infrastructures that we see now in parks. So Elk Mountain Campground is a campground on the park. It is located in a ponderosa pine forest, and it is about 1.25 miles from the visitor center. This campground has over 75 spots for tents and other recreational vehicles, and is open year-round. So they offer campfire programs in the summer, and then they also do offer those in the winter. However, there are very limited services. We get into the geology now. So basically, this is mainly going to focus on the cave, not too much about the land above the cave. But there are 3 levels in the Wind Cave system, which are located in the upper 76 meters of the Mississippian Passipa limestone. There is chert, gypsum, and anhydrite lenses within the limestone that reveal evidence of very high periods of evaporation. When the sea levels would drop, the dissolution of limestone would form a Kaskaskia paleokarst terrain with solution fissures, sinkholes, and caves. And due to this unconformity that exists between the limestone and the overlaying, the Pennsylvania Peninsula Formation Red sands and clays tend to fill in the cavities. However, if the cavities were not filled in by those, they were eventually coated in dogtooth spar. The subsequent deposition of the Permiana opichichal, the Permiana minicot limestone, Triassic spearfish formation, and Tertiary White River group would follow. Paleocene and Eocene erosion would remove the overlying sediments down to the oh my god. It's spelled like Minnesota almost. Minnelusa, I believe. Eventually, uplifts would lower the water table and would eventually drain the cave system, thus enlarging it while it was doing that. The water level today is 150 meters below the surface. Boxworks were first noted in the Wind Cave, and the calcite fins were once cracks filling gypsum and anhydrite. Lower levels of the cave have boxworks that tend to mix with frostworks and cave popcorn. And then heliosite bushes were also first discovered in the Wind Cave, and moon milk is found on many of the surfaces, while calcite rafts are found in the lower levels of the cave. Now, I was gonna end on geology, but then I stumbled upon how the park appears in popular culture today. So, for some reason, during the 2020 Democratic Party presidential debate on December 19, 2019, candidate Senator Amy Klobuchar referenced the Wind Cave as an attack on a fellow candidate, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Basically what happened was Pete went to a wine cave for one of his things. I'm not into politics, but for one of his things he went to a wine cave, and as kind of an attack, she was like, oh, well, I've been to a wind cave before, but never to a wine cave. You know, like, it was weird. It wasn't much of an attack. I just kind of read that and was like, okay. I mean, I probably have to read more into it, but I was just kind of sitting there like, this is an attack? Alrighty then. So the cave is also featured in Dan Jorgensen's novel, And the Wind Whispered. And that is all that it was really referenced in popular culture. However, I do find that attack on a fellow candidate kind of funny. So I thought I'd add that as kind of our finishing subject for this park. And that's about it. That is all I really have to cover on the Wind Cave. This was another short one. And I think that's about it. Our next episode will be on the Grand Tetons, so I'm excited for that one. And as always, until our next adventure, may your trails be filled with wanderlust, and I will see y'all in the parks. Goodbye!